up in Judges chapter 5, he turns around where Israel's crying out because it's under the hand of the Midianites and all of that, and they're crying out to God, and God sends them a prophet. And the prophet comes to them and he says, you know what, it's all your fault. I told you not to worship the gods in the land I'm taking to you, but you didn't listen. That was his word. You do that in most Western churches today and you will not get invited back. The pastor wants the prophetic people to come in and say really nice things about his church and really nice things about his church people. And if you do that, you'll get invited back. Some, not all, some are doing that for commercial reasons. The teaching of Balaam is a teaching of mercenary ministry, counseling the church to abandon godly separation and noble character in favour of worldly conformity. You see that in 2 Peter 2:15. Forsaking the right way, they have gone astray, having followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. Next is the spirit of compromise. Conditions recorded in these scriptures for this church age result from an unknowingly embracing the spirit of compromise that facilitates the substitution of the Holy Spirit with the spirit of this world. So what the enemy, the teaching of Balaam, what the enemy couldn't accomplish in a head-to-head battle, he achieves through a deceptive snare. And that's exactly what Constantine did. The devil could not beat the church at miracles, signs and wonders, just like he couldn't beat Moses. So he does it through deception and compromise and weaving the way through. Does it really matter? Does it really matter if you don't celebrate Christ's death at Passover? Does it really matter if the days are named after of our week are named after gods? Does it really matter? And anyway, what a great idea to celebrate Christ's birth, but we'll just use one of our pagan festivals for it. Now, I'm not saying don't celebrate Christmas. It's as good a day as any to go and celebrate it. You know, I'm not being a party pooper here. I like Christmas. I just kind of wish my birthday wasn't right on top of it, you know? And then everything was all in once in the year. But that's just me, you know? There's this, you know, it doesn't... We're celebrating Jesus on Christmas Day, not a pagan festival. But on the other hand, you see this deception and compromise and that weaving its way through. The teaching of the Nicolaitans, a symbolic name that represents the hierarchy of a ruling class over the rest of the people, a pecking order of fleshly leadership. You know, I don't know if I shared it last night or in one of the other sessions, but I was in a church in Phoenix, Arizona, where every single person in the church had an official church name badge on that they wore, and everyone started with their title. You know, elder so-and-so, pastor so-and-so, youth pastor so-and-so, and then you'd get caretaker so-and-so and toilet cleaner. No, they didn't have the toilet cleaner one. But everybody had their name badge and everybody wore it. Pecking order, so that everybody knows where they sit in the hierarchy of the church. You're wearing name badges today for one simple reason. It takes me a long time to remember people's names because I see so many of you. So that your name badge is to help me, not as an official title. But that's why you're wearing it. But what was once the practices or the deeds has matured now into the teachings. What was once an influence has now become a doctrine and a way of governing people. Somebody's bright idea has now become law in the church. And within that whole Pergamon church thing, their reward was to he who overcomes gets the right to eat from the tree of life in the paradise of God. I will give him a white stone, and on that white stone a new name will be written, and that which no one knows except him who receives it. There's this, if you overcome the compromise, if you overcome this Nicolaitan spirit, then you'll get a white name given to you on a stone. So we're still tracking through the Dark Ages. In this period, 57 million people were martyred for the sake of the gospel. They would not bow their knee to it. Thyatira, their commendation was faithful endurance. I know your deeds, and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than the first. But there's compromise, and false teaching is their rebuke. But I have this against you. You hate the woman, you have tolerated the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacred to idols. You see there the result of the marriage of the church and paganism that took place in the previous church era, now establishing in it. So we move from the Balaam church into the Jezebelic church of Thyatira. And during this time, the church, like Jezebel, persecuted the prophets, persecuted the overcomers, along with many who held incorrect views of God. So you have all this wrong teaching in the church coming in now. This is Thyatira is the church that goes right up to Martin Luther in 1512. This is the indulgences era. This is purgatory era. This is where you don't just pray to Mary. You don't have to pray to Jesus comes in. Everything to devoid contact with heaven is established in the church, right? Because that's supernatural. If you tap into that power, stuff will happen that comes in. This whole intermarriage thing that Balaam introduces comes to a pinnacle when Ahab marries Jezebel, the daughter of the king of the Zidonians. And Jezebel sets about murdering the prophets. This is the confrontation, on Mount Carmel. This is that spirit and that era at the days. Obadiah takes 100 prophets, splits them up and feeds them bread and water to keep them going away. So a remnant of people survive and overcome that era. And you have this clash. You see Elijah's a symbol of an overcomer, one who demonstrates the supernatural, confronts the Balaam, confronts this Jezebelic spirit, the false prophetic. That showdown's coming. That showdown's coming. You saw it with I'm trying to think who it was in one of God's generals in the book where he just purely lines up wheelchair cases on the stage. All those that don't believe in divine healing, don't believe in his ministry, he lets them. This is Mount Carmel time. 10 wheelchairs on something like that on the platform, and he says, right, you guys, you go for it. And he gives them ages to go and get these people healed, and not one of them moves. Not one person's even remotely got a twinge of anything going on in them. And he says, okay, you've had your turn. Now, Spirit of God, bang, 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 bang. Every single one got up out of their wheelchairs. Mount Carmel. And that's it. That's in like the last 40 years, 50 years that went on. This point where the purity of the gospel and the power of the kingdom is released. Elijah and the false prophets come in. And the overcomer's reward for Thyatira, authority over nations. He who overcomes and who keeps my deeds until the end, I will give him authority over nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. As I also received. I'm trying to get used to new glasses, by the way, if you're wondering why I'm fluffing this. I'm trying to get the distance right. As I have also received authority from my Father. There's this overcomer's reward. Why? Because we've overcome all of the false teaching and everything else. And that ends the Dark Ages with one little man coming and emerging who's been educated, who's God's man, been educated, understands the Latin, studied the scriptures, read through it, but has a different spirit in him, and he begins to emerge, and that's Martin Luther. And we transition and we'll look at some of these slides in a minute, as this restoration movement begins to take hold in the church by one man. In fact, let's jump over to, let me see if I can jump over to that at this point.